guys, welcome back. So firstly, I just want to apologise for no video last week. Really, I was just not really feeling that great. Lack of sleep, a little bit overworked, and I just didn't have the energy. But I'm back today with a really interesting, really good case. So I've noticed obviously the video viewing figures have been going up recently, so I just really appreciate that. Please keep watching, like, subscribe, and comment any cases you would like me to cover, any tips, any comments or anything is always welcome. So today's case is one you may have heard of, especially obviously if you were around in the 90s, you probably would have heard of this case. Is Colin Island. So without further ado, let's get into the backstory of Colin. So he was born on March 16th, 1954. His mother was 17 years old at the time. Can't really find any sort of information about his father. What I do know is that his father was around the same age as his mother, and they were unmarried. The reason I'm putting that in there is obviously for those people of a certain age, they will remember being an unmarried parent back in the 1950s. It was seen as really socially not acceptable, and there was a lot of stigma attached to it, shall we say. So his father actually abandoned the pair of them from the get-go. He just didn't want anything to do with Colin, didn't want to know, had no interest in having a baby. So his mother was forced to move back in with her parents and her brother. So he was born in Dartford in Kent and lived on Myrtle Road. And his mother worked as a newsagent shop assistant, but obviously knowing that she couldn't survive on the poor pay that she was getting, which is why she moved back in with her parents. So they lived with their parents until, they lived with her parents until 1959, and she got her own place on Birch Road in Kent. And for the next 6 years or so, they ended up moving around 9 times, settling in Sidcup, and for a time living in a place called Westmoreland. And Westmoreland was a camp of wooden huts, and they were built for homeless women and children. And this is based in Maidstone in Kent. So 3 months later, after living in Westmoreland, his mother moves Colin back to his grandparents' house. And in 1961, she met and married an electrician. He reportedly had a really good sense of humour, especially with Colin. They seemed to got on quite well. Even Colin took on his surname. But he only worked actually sporadically, and this left the family feeling really financially unstable. So, in his lifetime, Colin attended 6 schools by the age of 10, always labelled as a new boy, and his thin and lanky frame and his bow-legged stance, this caused him to be bullied, and he was described as a thin, lanky runt. So with his mother's permission, Colin was very often absent from school. Or he would just constantly be late, and when he did go into school, he was often caned. So back in those days, like 1960s, when he was growing up, punishment at school involved that. It was obviously either like a ruler or a cane or something like that. I know a lot of people say bring back the cane, but I don't know. I think there's better ways to punish someone than actually physically hitting them with a lump of wood. but that's just my opinion. So, in 1964, the family was extended by a new sibling, but they were soon evicted from their home due to the non payment of rent. Colin's mother took her children back to Westmoreland, and the father went back to his parents' house. Colin, at this point, he was then placed into a foster care of a family in Wainscott, and the father actually then abandoned his child, wife, and his stepchild. In 1966, she met and married another man and moved to Sheerness, and the second marriage was described as long and stable. And this second marriage was able to provide the financial security that she was obviously craving at that time. So, at this point, Colin had started secondary school, and the bullying continued, and Colin was described as sad, lonely, and withdrawn. He was also described as really, really immature for his age. And the only highlight he said that he got from around this time of his life was the fact that he was a member of the Sea Cadets. So while at secondary school, Colin said he was approached 4 times by older men in like trying to groom him for sex. The first time was when he worked at a fairground and a man approached his mother and offered her a necklace in return of having sexual acts with Colin. The second was in a public toilet when a man in his early 20s, he looked over the stalls and watched Colin while he was on the toilet. And this man apparently didn't say anything to Colin, didn't give any inclination of what he wanted, just sat there and watched. And the third was at the local cinema when he was approached by the local optician, and this guy just basically asked him outright for sex. And the fourth was from a man working in a charity shop where while Colin got away each time unharmed, he said that at this point he was just filled with anger and he had absolutely no outlet. So the reason that he seemed to not get any justice for this, in the 1960s, 1970s, there was a lot of emphasis on men. And I think it was sort of seen as, if something like this happened, it would just be like, oh, well, men have needs and whatnot. Thankfully, obviously, times have changed. We take it a lot more seriously. But in those days, it really wasn't. It was just seen as, well, the man has needs and so on and so forth. So in 1970, Colin was 16, and this is just basically when his criminal career basically started. So it's still aside as sort of like, low level petty stuff, but then obviously as we go on with the story, you'll notice obviously it progresses into far more serious stuff. So, age 16, he was arrested after stealing money to run away to London. So this was around £4 that he stole. And he was sent to Finchton Manor School in Kent, and his fees were paid for by the local council. It was said to be a specialist school for boys with high intelligence and emotional problems. Whilst there, Colin was once again bullied severely, and he actually retaliated by setting fire to one of the boys' rooms. He was then sent away, and he had at this point managed to run away back to London. Colin survived his time in London by committing robberies, and he was eventually caught and sent to Hollisby Bay. So this was a Borstal Reform Centre. But he once again ran away and was caught and sent to serve the rest of his sentence split between stricter ball stalls in Rochester and Grendon, leaving in 1972, aged 18. So it's around this time as well that he met his first girlfriend, first serious girlfriend. But obviously, because of his criminal activity, the relationship really didn't last that long. In December 1975, aged 21, he was arrested for 2 counts of burglary, stealing a car, and damage to a property, and he was sentenced to another 18 months. He served 12 months in crowded London prisons before being sent to Lewes Prison. So that's a prison that's just outside of Brighton. He was there for the remaining 6 months of his sentence. He was released early, however, in November 1975, and he met a woman who became his second really serious partner. And this woman who was described as 5 years older than him, and she was the mother of 4. So they ended up living together after a few months, and even though it was like a really, really short relationship, they started discussing the possibility of marriage. So this never actually happened. He never got married to this woman. And 1977, he was found guilty of demanding without menace and sentenced once again to 18 months. He was then sentenced to 2 years imprisonment in 1980 for robbery, 2 months in 1981 for attempted deception, and 6 months in 1982 and 83 for going equipped to cheat. I'm not really sure what equipped to cheat means. I think it's something to do with fraud. If anyone wants to comment down below, just let me know if I'm right or not, but I'm pretty sure there's something to do with fraud. So between these gaps of prison, Colin would work temporarily as a volunteer firefighter, worked as a chef. He was a volunteer at a homeless shelter, and he was also a bouncer at various bars and gay nightclubs. So it was whilst working as a chef, Colin met his first wife, Virginia Zammit. They met in 1981 at a lecture. She was actually 36 at the time, and she was wheelchair bound after an RTA, which happened when she was 24. So Virginia and Colin were actually married in 1982, and they ended up moving to Holloway, where Ireland got the moniker the Gentle Giant. So the marriage actually lasted about 5 years, but obviously it ended due to Colin actually being described as quite aggressive towards Virginia, very violent, and they later divorced in 1987 after Colin admitted to an affair. In 1989, Colin met his second wife, Janet Young, and so Janet was the landlady of a pub called the Globe in Buckfast in Devon. So she had 2 children, aged 11 and 13 at the time, and they lived with her above the pub. And Janet said that she was instantly attracted to Colin's impressive stature. She's described in interviews of, Colin just basically walking through the door, everyone falling silent. She just saw like there was an instant attraction towards him, but obviously she also went on to say that her barmaids obviously noticed something straight away off about Colin and actually warned Janet off him. But I think we've all been in that situation, where our friend is sort of attracted to the wrong sort of person, and we always say, oh, they're bad news and whatever, but they still go ahead and be with that person. It's just human nature. Colin at this point, he was over 6 feet tall, and very well built, very stocky. So I think that's just obviously what attracted Janet in the first place. So Janet ended up ignoring her barmaid's concerns, and actually about into a week into their relationship, Colin actually moved in. Very risky move there, if I'm honest. Like, uh, there's no way that you could possibly know someone or get to know someone within a week of meeting them. Um, but hey, so Colin actually worked in the bar with Janet, and a role that he said to have really hated, and the customers actually reciprocated this. So within 3 months of meeting, Colin and Janet were married at Newton Abbot Register Office, and things seemed to go really well at first, but obviously behind closed doors, Colin, yet again, his violent tendencies began to rear that ugly head, and obviously he was very aggressive towards Janet. Um, a few months later, he went to take Janet and her kids to visit his mother in Margate in Kent. He then basically made his excuses, left the house, jumped into Janet's car, drove off, withdrew money from their bank account, left Janet and her kids in Margate, and never had any more contact with them. At this point, Colin had relocated to Southend-on-Sea, and he worked as a homeless shelter. So, in December 1992, some of the staff they began making allegations against Colin, and he eventually resigned from his position. And he became increasingly frustrated by his lack of direction in his life. He got fed up with having unskilled work, and on New Year's Day, January 1993, a really fraught and angry Colin, he set himself a New Year's resolutions. So obviously a lot of us do set New Year's resolutions where, it's going to be, we're going to save money, we're going to eat a bit healthy, try and lose a bit of weight, start going to the gym more. No, Colin's New Year's resolution was that he was going to become a serial killer. So he then went about obviously researching this, and he put in a lot of effort, I'm not going to lie. He set about thinking that London would be his best opportunity for that. He knew that police would only look at a geographic profiling, because they always look for a killer that's within a 7 to 10 mile radius of where the victim is. And obviously London is a very big place. It's split into numerous boroughs, and you could basically go to West London, commit a murder, go to East London, North London, South London, and obviously they're just going to look within that little borough or the surrounding boroughs. They're not going to look at the whole of London together. So Colin slowly started becoming a regular at a pub called the Colin. This is on Old Brompton Road, Earls Court, and this has changed its name now to the Pembroke, and this changed in 2008. So it became a gastropub in 2008, but I believe they probably just wanted to distance themselves somehow from the reputation that the pub had withheld, because Colin wasn't the actual first serial killer, and he probably isn't the last, but he wasn't the first one around this time to start frequenting the pub to meet his victims. So obviously, the pub had at one point a really bad reputation. So on the night of the 8th of March 1993, Peter met 45-year-old Peter Walker. Peter was a choreographer from Battersea. Colin knew from his time working at the gay nightclub about the gay S&M culture, and the handkerchief code. So, for those of you who are not familiar with the handkerchief code, sorry, I got my words a bit mixed up there. So, the handkerchief code was basically a way of gay men identifying if they were sub or dom, or what sexual practice they liked, and obviously they were all different colours. So obviously there'll be like a red handkerchief when you're into one certain type of sex act, a lavender handkerchief into another one, yellow in so on and so forth. You get the drift. So Colin went with the pretense of being a top master, and Peter was to be his bottom sub. And when they arrived at Peter's flat, he allowed Colin to tie him to the bed, and Colin ended up making a makeshift gag, tying two condoms together and placing this in Peter's mouth. So while Peter wasn't expecting it and was obviously rendered really helpless, Colin ended up taking out his murder kit. This contained knife, gloves, cord, a change of clothes, and he then began beating Peter with a dog lead, and then pummeling Peter with his fists. He then placed a bag over Peter's head and suffocated him. He then went about, started really doing weird after death mutation on the body. He began burning Peter's pubic hair. Apparently he wanted to know what that smelled like. He then went about cleaning up the crime scene, and he then placed condoms into Peter's mouth, inserted a condom into Peter's nostril, and placed two teddies on Peter's chest and positioned them in the 69 position. So Colin ended up staying in the flat that night, and he returned home in the morning, and he sat at home and just basically waited for the news to come up and report on Peter's death. However, never happened, never came on the news, and this really angered Colin at this point. He wasn't getting recognised for his work. So he went and contacted the Sun newspaper, and he basically requested to speak to someone to report two dogs locked in the flat. And the person on the other end of the phone, they just basically told him, well, we're not going to bother reporting about that. And Colin then informed them about Peter's body, and then just basically cut off the phone call, cut it dead. And police ended up going to Peter's flat, and at first they couldn't find any evidence to link his death, and they basically just put Peter's death down to an S&M sex game that had gone wrong. And bizarrely, in a pretty weird thing, like the weirdest thing I've ever read in my life, the weirdest law I've ever read in my life. So the actual day before Peter had died, so on the 7th of March 1993, a law had actually passed, and this made S&M between consenting adults, and I'm using that word consenting because this is the information that I found. It actually made S&M between consenting adults illegal. Make it make sense. It's just really, really bizarre to me. But so, with obviously this new law and the police reporting it as an S&M sex game gone wrong, no one wanted to come forward. So obviously they just didn't want to end up prosecuting themselves by coming forward. Like any sort of witnesses, anyone who had contact with Peter at that particular time. Obviously to try, I mean, obviously your first ball call would be to try and, prove that you were innocent, but with this new ridiculous law that had come in, people just were too scared to get arrested, end up being done for that rather than being done for murder. So on the 28th of May 1993, Colin went back to the Colin pub and he met 37-year-old librarian Christopher Dunn. So Christopher confessed that he too was a submissive, and Christopher took Colin back to his flat in Wildstone, and they ended up watching an S&M porn video together. So Colin then asked Christopher to go and get himself ready for whatever they were going to perform. And Christopher went to his bedroom, and Colin actually found Christopher in there naked, apart from wearing a belt and a studded harness. He told Christopher to lay down face first on the bed, and he ended up tying Christopher's ankles together and then handcuffed him, and he basically began torturing Christopher and beating him. Colin then decided he needed to reimburse him for his travel costs, like the inconvenience of him having to come down and do this sort of thing. And he ended up demanding Christopher's PIN number, and he started torturing the information out of Christopher by holding a lighter to Christopher's testicles. And he then suffocated Christopher by stuffing cloth into his mouth. He ended up leaving the flat when to do so, when he felt it was safe to do so. Went to an ATM and withdrew £200 out of Christopher's account. He then discarded his clothes and returned to Southend. Christopher lay in his flat for the next 2 days before his friend found his body. And it's the exact same thing that happened with Peter. The police just put Christopher's death down as a S&M sex game gone wrong. The 4th of June 1993, Colin returned to the Colehern and met Perry Bradley III. So Perry was 35 and he was a businessman from Texas. And he was the son of a US congressman. So they went back to Perry's Kensington house and suggested tying him up as foreplay. So at first Perry sort of declined this. He just explained that he wasn't into S&M. He then obviously ended up eventually agreeing, sadly. Colin convinced him that S&M and tying him up was the only way that he would be able to be aroused. He then tied Perry face down and threatened Perry for his PIN number. Perry flat out refused this and basically said that he would walk to the cash point with Colin. Colin ended up refusing and told Perry to just basically go to sleep. Bizarrely, how on earth he managed to do this, I do not know, but Perry did end up falling asleep. And Colin suffocated him and placed a doll on top of Perry's body. What the doll sort of represented, I don't really know. I know in some bizarre video that I've seen on the internet, there is this thing called man birthing where, I'm not even going to go into it because I probably can't on YouTube, but these videos are out there, trust me, so it may represent something to do with the S&M community, but I don't really know, if I'm honest. So after doing his usual clean-up of the crime scene, Colin left with £100 in cash, and then he withdrew another £200 from Perry's account. Once again, the police just failed to make any link between Peter and Christopher's deaths. So Colin, in the meantime, he was getting really, really angry about the lack of publicity the killings were getting. And on the 7th of June 1993, Colin went back to the coal home and met 33-year-old Andrew Collier, who worked as a warden at a housing complex. So they went back to Andrew's flat in Dalston, and he consented to being tied up. And once again, Colin demanded Andrew's PIN number. And when Andrew finally gave it over, Colin strangled Andrew with a noose. And it was while doing his usual clean-up of the flat, Colin discovered doctor's notes, and these doctor's notes stated that Andrew was HIV positive. And this really, really angered Colin, made him so angry, and he ended up killing Andrew's cat. And he ended up burning parts of Andrew's body. He then placed a condom on Andrew's penis. What I'm going to talk now, actually, if it's a bit too much for you, then feel free to just turn off, because it does involve some really, really bizarre, sick, twisted behaviour at this point. So, without further ado, I'm just going to carry on. So he burnt parts of Andrew's body, and after this, he placed a condom onto Andrew's penis, one condom on the cat's tail. He then positioned the cat to lay across Andrew's stomach and his chest. He placed the cat's tail into Andrew's mouth and placed Andrew's penis into the cat's mouth, and then closed the cat's mouth around this. So it was during his police interview, the police asked why he killed the cat, and Colin said that he was angry that when Peter's death was articled, so obviously going back to the first murder, if you remember, obviously Colin had run the Sun newspaper to report dogs being locked in a flat, and the Sun didn't want to know, but obviously at some point they released a story about Peter's body being found, and they put in the article it was found to a concerned animal lover. And apparently, this for some weird reason, this really pissed Colin off, and he used this as the main reason as to why he killed the cat, because he didn't want to be seen as an animal lover. He wanted to be seen as a serial killer. So it was while doing his usual clean down of the crime scene that Colin overheard a noise going on outside, and he actually went to go and investigate, and he stupidly left a palm print on Andrew's window. So obviously this was later found while the police attended, but obviously we'll get back into that. He then went home by train, and he discarded items of clothing and that out of the train window. So obviously these all fell into the tracks, and obviously him believing that this would just blend into the other bits of rubbish that are often discarded on train tracks. So Colin's fifth and final victim was 41-year-old Emmanuel Spitari. So Manuel was a chef from Malta. So they met on the 12th of June 1993, at the Colin, and they ended up having to take a series of trains back to Emmanuel's flat in Catford. And immediately, as soon as they got in, he tied Emmanuel to the bed and ended up tying a noose around his neck, demanding Emmanuel's PIN number. When he got the information, he strangled Emmanuel to death. He then went around and gathered up a load of furniture, a load of broken stuff, placed them onto one big pile and set this on fire. Because obviously he knows in his head that fire is incredibly destructive, and it was a way of the police not being able to piece it together any sort of information from this crime scene. He was hoping to obviously end up burning the whole entire building down, but the fire basically just fizzled out as quick as it went up. So Colin then returned home on the 30th of June. He rang the police and told them to look for a body at the scene of a fire in South London. He told police that he had knowledge on serial killers and that he reached that status as he had now killed 5 people. So he said that, at this point he will be able to stop, saying that he wanted to see how easy it could be done. Despite Colin's information, Emmanuel's body actually lay in the flat for another 2 days, and he was discovered by his landlady on the 15th of June 1993. So after Emmanuel's murder, the media finally began reporting Colin's crimes. But obviously we're talking about 1993, the levels of homophobia in the 90s, 80s, 90s, 70s, crazy levels. And obviously this all stems down from obviously the AIDS pandemic in the 80s. You only have to think about the amount of times. Famous example. I can't remember if it was John or Justin Fashanu, the footballer. Then there was Julian Clary with that fisting joke that he made at an award ceremony about Norman Lamont. So they ended up giving Colin the moniker Gay Slayer, or the one that really got my goat up, from the Sun newspaper, who gave Colin the moniker Fairy Liquidator. It's one of the main reasons that I just absolutely despise the Sun. Not only are they just shit journalists, they cover shit stories, so many things going on in the world, but, Katie Price's next boob job is their next big, headline. Or if you don't look a certain way, you're not labelled as a beauty or hunk, whatever. Sorry, I just digressed there. Just let my personal feelings get in the way. We'll get on with the story. So yeah, the Sun newspaper ended up reporting Colin as the Fairy Liquidator. So DS Ken John, he was given the task to report a link, and links had finally been made between Peter and Christopher's death, and then eventually they were able to add Andrew, Perry and Emmanuel's deaths to this link. DS John appealed to the gay community to stay alert and to keep in contact with friends if they went off with strangers. He went on to speculate that the killer may have AIDS and was using this as a motivation for revenge. On the 17th of June, DS John, he made a direct appeal to Colin via the media and basically requested that Colin give himself up. On the 19th of June, police attended the Pride Festival and ended up handing out around 50,000 flyers. And they basically appealed for anyone with any sort of information to come forward and help with the investigation. Psychologist Dr. Mike Berry, he was asked to draw up a profile of the killer, and in the report he said that the killer was fueled by violent fantasies, but each murder was never as good as the fantasy, and therefore he was driven to kill again and again and again. He believed that the killer was not HIV positive, so therefore didn't kill in an act of revenge. Dr. Jonas Rappaport agreed with this, and he added that the killer wasn't gay himself, but he posed as gay to attract his victims. He said that the killer was really well organised, a large build, physically strong, and this gave him the confidence to overpower his victims. So from knowing what we know about Colin, like this really, really good psychological analysis of Colin. Sorry, bit of a mouthful to get my words out there. So on the 24th of June, police issued a description of who they were looking for, and they obtained trained CCTV footage of a man with Emmanuel Spiteri. They described a white male aged between 30 and 40. He was over 6 feet tall. He was clean shaven, had a full face, dark brown hair and dirty stained teeth. Using this, they were able to produce an e-fit. And on the 2nd of July, the police released the CCTV alongside the e-fit, and at this point they started receiving phone calls. They received over 40 phone calls apparently. This all from men saying they had spoke to the man in the images at the Colhern pub. On the 19th of July, Colin went to his solicitor and basically told him that he was with Emmanuel the night in question. He said that it was him on the CCTV on the train with Emmanuel, and he basically said that he went back to Emmanuel's flat for drinks, whatever, but he denied killing Emmanuel. He said that when he left, Emmanuel was very much alive. On the 21st of July, Colin was charged with Andrew's murder, and on the 23rd, he was actually charged with Emmanuel's murder. Colin was held on remand, and for someone who was getting angry about, his crimes not being reported, sitting there ringing the police saying that, he had knowledge on serial killers, that because he was one himself, even though he wasn't completely giving himself up, he wanted to be recognised for his work. He sat in the cell while on remand and basically just protested all innocence. So Colin wasn't sent to trial in the end, despite obviously signs of protesting his innocence. He wasn't sent to trial. As on the 19th of August 1993, he confessed to all 5 murders, and he basically was interviewed for numerous hours and showed absolutely zero emotion. He gave full and frank details of each murder, and he said that he got knowledge from crime scene cleaning from The Bill. For those of you who don't remember, The Bill was a really long running TV series, finished I think about 18 years ago, I think it was. But he basically said that he got information about crime scene cleaning from The Bill. And he stated 4 points during his interview that he wanted the police to believe. So he stated that he had never been under the influence of drugs or alcohol during the murders. He was not gay or bisexual. Not that it matters, but you know, it's good to clarify it out there, I suppose. He hadn't undressed or engaged in any sex with the 5 men. He held no grudges against the gay men, and that he only chose gay people because at that particular time they were really easy targets. And I suppose in a way, probably were. He claimed that it was maldeviancy that triggered his anger, which began with his encounters with the 4 paedophiles that he met when he was younger. He said that his victims were deviants who just basically happened to be gay, and he saw himself getting rid of vermin, and that he wanted to be recognised as a superior person. So, a deviant, just to point it out there, is Myers, I think like, the word has sort of been confused. You know, a deviant is someone in Myers who does practice S&M, but it's always, you know, with consenting adults. But that word has sort of obviously been adopted to talk about paedophilia. I mean, I might be wrong, but looking up the word, that's what I took from that. Feel free to point out if I am wrong and explain your reasons why. I always welcome any sort of criticism, but for me, a deviant is just someone who's not into vanilla sex. But like I said, I could be wrong, but that's just what I took from the meaning of the word. So the next day, Colin was found guilty of all 5 murders, and he was given a whole life tariff, which obviously, as we all know by now, it basically means that he was never going to be released from prison. So not much was absolutely known about his time in prison. Former Governor Vanessa Frake, she described him as cold-eyed and staring. So past couple of months I watched a video with Vanessa. She done a podcast with Sean Atwood. If you haven't seen it, I suggest looking it up. It's really, really interesting. But she talks about the time that she bumped into Colin Island while she was doing her prison officer training, I believe it was, or she was already working at that particular prison that he was living in. But yeah, she speaks about obviously bumping into him at this point. So yeah, look up Sean Atwood and look out for the interview with Vanessa Frake. Really, really interesting. So, handed down the sentence, Mr. Justice Sachs said that he was exceptionally dangerous, frightening, and he added on the end, to take 1 life is an outrage, to take 5 is carnage. So it was rumoured that while serving his sentence at HMP Wakefield, Colin strangled a convicted child murderer, and he effectively was shipped out to HMP Whitemoor in Cambridgeshire. I put the word rumour in there because I've only actually found one very small piece of information about that, which obviously I've written down in my notes, but I cannot find anything else about that. So if anyone is able to find that, let me know. But for me personally, I can only find that small expert, so obviously that's the only reason that I put rumoured. So Colin was actually mentioned in a song called "The Archives of Pain." This is a song by a band called the Manic Street Preachers. But no books or articles have actually been written about him. Um, and really weirdly, due to Colin confessing that he has studied serial killers, ex FBI agent Robert Ressler's book, Whoever Fights Monsters, this was actually removed from shelves. Around this time that Colin was sentenced, it was taken down because Colin actually confessed to reading the book. So Colin, he actually ended up dying in prison, aged 57, on the 21st of February 2012. So his death was attributed to pulmonary fibrosis, um, and a fractured hip he had suffered earlier that month. At this point, he had actually allegedly returned to HMP Wakefield, but like I said, obviously earlier with the move and everything, I can't really find any other information about that. I can't find any information about his time in prison, other than the fact that he spent time in both Wakefield and Whitemore. I really genuinely hope that Colin is in the pits of hell, where he belongs. I really don't have anything about that anymore to add than that, really. I believe he ended up getting a more peaceful ending than what he afforded his victims, really. The ending that he just frankly didn't deserve. But anyway, so that's the end of this video. I really hope you find that interesting. I've got a slight cough, so please excuse any coughing and whatnot. Just obviously in the process of trying to get myself a little bit better. But I really appreciate your time today, guys. Please leave me a like, leave me a subscribe, comment, and everything. Let's get these algorithms started, and I will see you soon for the next case. Take care. Much love.